Now, our first huge delineation from Marxist thought comes in the form of French philosopher Michel Foucault. This is what now is known as discourse theory. Like I said, Marx and most Marxist thinkers are macro philosophers for the most part. Most of their philosophies take place at the institutional level, or at the very least, focusing on large groups of people. None of the people we talk about would really talk about the individual and our individual interactions and how we are led to believe in ideology based on our conversations with individual people. But Foucault gives us that. Discourse theory argues against the economism of ideology theory and undermines the privileged standpoint of the working class as a historical actor. Here, social power is diffused among a gigantic web that lacks a definite center. So he changes power structures, he offers a new perspective on that, and as a result, he changes the way that we think of the diffusion and perpetuation of ideology. He largely puts the focus back on individuals and their daily lives, because we can talk about all day how the education system is institutionalized and used as a tool to oppress and indoctrinate people, but you're essentially removing individuals from that equation when we talk about it at that level. Foucault gives us that. He puts it back on the individual. And he basically, his conception of power is that power is everywhere. Everywhere we go, everything we do, everyone we talk to, every single second of our waking lives is power. The words I'm saying to you right now, there is some power relationship in these words. What are they? What is the power dynamic right here? Teacher, student. You're sitting there, I'm standing here, right? Etc. I have control of this and whatever, right? I have a marker and you guys don't. Whatever. All of these power dynamics. And in fact, Foucault actually writes a lot about architecture and its relationship to power, and he would look at this room and say it's designed specifically with a certain power dynamic in mind. How so?
The chairs are facing you.
Chairs are facing me.
You stand there.
Think about the architecture. How is the room designed? It's pointing directly at me. All of the walls are putting the focus directly on me. The architecture itself is designed as a manifestation of power. You have to simply on prisons and their organization and power. It's fascinating. He has a lot of incredibly well-known works. For our purposes, for ideology, the two most famous ones are Discipline and Punish, which is in 1975. And then the other one is Power and Knowledge, and it's a collection of lectures and essays by Foucault. That one's, he wrote them over 1972 to 1977.
The last one was Power/Knowledge.
Power/Knowledge, that's what it's called. So he says, every single second of our waking lives, we are taking part in the power process. And as a result, we are either accepting or creating or critiquing the dominant ideology, based on what we're saying, where we're saying it, who we're saying it with, etc. But he says that, in fact, I have a quote here. And he provides critiques of Marxism along the way, as you might imagine. So here's a quote. This is from Power and Knowledge. I would remind you how numerous have been those who for many years now, probably for more than half a century, have questioned whether Marxism was or was not a science. One might say that the same issue has been posed and continues to be posed in the case of psychoanalysis, or even worse, in that of semiology of literary texts. But to all of these demands, is it or is it not a science, the genealogies or the genealogists would reply, if you really want to know, the fault lies in your very determination to make a science out of Marxism or psychoanalysis or this or that study. If we have any objection against Marxism, it lies in the fact that it could effectively be a science. In more detailed terms, I would say that even before we can know the extent to which something such as Marxism or psychoanalysis can be compared to a scientific practice in its everyday functioning, its rules of construction, its working concepts, that even before we can pose the question of a formal and structural analogy between Marxist or psychoanalytic discourse it is surely necessary to question ourselves about our aspirations for the kind of power that is presumed to accompany such a science. It is surely the following kinds of questions that would need to be posed. What types of knowledge do you want to disqualify in the very instant of your demand? Is this a science? Which speaking, discoursing subjects, which subjects of experience and knowledge do you then want to diminish when you say, I who conduct this discourse is conducting a scientific discourse, and I am a scientist? Which theoretical, political avant-garde do you want to enthrone in order to isolate it from all the discontinuous forms of knowledge that circulate about it? When I see you straining to establish the scientificity of Marxism, I do not really think that you are demonstrating once and for all that Marxism has a rational structure, and that therefore its propositions are the outcome of verifiable procedures. For me, you are doing something altogether different. You are investing Marxist discourses and those who uphold them with the effects of a power which the West since medieval times has attributed to science and has reserved for those engaged in scientific discourse. Foucault takes a meta perspective of power. The Marxists stop at Marxism, right? That's their theory, that's their ideology. He goes beyond that and says, why are you fighting so hard to make Marxism to establish it as a science? There are power dynamics in solely doing that. Who are you trying to dethrone? Who are you trying to discredit? What are all the things in a power dynamic that are going to happen if we all suddenly agree that Marxism is a science, that it is rational? That in everything that we do, there are power dynamics, and that we should constantly be questioning those dynamics. What are we trying to achieve? Who is going to be impacted and why? In every second of our lives. Obviously that's overwhelming and no one does that every second of their lives, but he says we should be asking these questions of these different philosophies. Power is everywhere. It is omnipresent. And we must be thinking about power in every single thing that we do. And ideology for Foucault is merely a manifestation of that power as a result of our daily discourses with one another. For him, there is no social ideology. Ideology is merely a result of us interacting with one another. And there are dominant discourses, right? Like he says, if you're arguing to make Marxism a dominant discourse, why are you doing so? What is the power in which you wish to attain, etc.? He just picks Marxism and community, right? Psychoanalysis is in there too. If you're a computer scientist and you work in the world of computer science, why is it important to you that computer science is widely respected and get you a job when you graduate, etc., etc.? What are the power dynamics there? Right? Does that make sense? So Foucault puts the onus back on the individual and its power within the dynamic of ideology and how power is diffuse and ever-present within society. So this is the biggest delineation away from Marxism. Taking ideology out of the class and economic structure, out of the macro, and putting it back into each and every individual. And power is everything. Yes?
You argue against the idea that everyone's created equally, opportunity created like that. Everyone's an individual and all different. We all have different capabilities. Rather.
So the interesting thing about Foucault, it is fascinating to read. He's incredible. He would never make a specific statement like that. He might believe one thing or another, but in his writings, he would hardly ever make concrete statements like that. He would word it in more ambiguous, what are the power structures that make us believe that some people are not created at equal, blah, 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 right?
He had a huge impact on a later school that was developing in the 70s called post-structuralism.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that, he's like a leading scholar in that, and it affects all these other pieces of scholarship. Historians become post-structuralists, guys like Edward Said or Howard Zinn. I'm sure Nick can find sociologists that also from this point become post-structural in how they approach their discipline. So.
And then we shouldn't be analyzing the structures and social forces that exist in society. We should be analyzing the individuals that exist within their society and what do they believe and how do they act, what are their interactions like, etc. Yeah, Jared, he's one of the founders of this post-structuralist type of thing. Yeah, we're by far scraping the surface of Foucault. We could do a whole class. Yeah.
So he would ask, when he meets someone, he would ask, like, what do you enjoy doing? What do you tell me about yourself? Instead of, what do you do for work?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I don't know if you really did that, but yeah, exactly. That's what he would be interested in. I can tell a lot about you by the way that you live your daily life, right? If you're interested in kite surfing, okay, what does that tell me about your power? You're probably privileged. You have access to water, whatever, right? Most of the people in the inner city are kite surfing, whatever. And he would be able to tell a lot based on your basic answer. Long walks on the beach, okay, you must.
We also argue that the discourse is based on heavily the production of knowledge as well, like how knowledge is produced in a society. And that's something we're going to emphasize on heavily in this course, regardless of what ideology we're talking about, is how is knowledge produced? And that's how you really engage discourse as well. So.
Yep.
Didn't he also, I mean, one of the big things that he did from feminism and critical race theory is that he expanded it to sexuality?
Absolutely. One of his most famous books is The History of Sexuality, in which he argues fascinatingly that sexuality itself is an ideology. Sexuality itself wasn't really a thing until we defined it as a thing, until we in the 70s created these very specific terms and definitions that were homosexuality and created meanings behind those things. That yes, there was reproduction before this, but until we developed the ideology, there wasn't negative connotations associated with these various forms of physical pleasure. That it was once we gave them these definitions and began to medicalize them, etc., that we began to enter in this ideology that impacts the way that we view sexuality. Which is super interesting. Yes?
Was his basis for all of this so he didn't judge people?
I mean, I'm sure he judged the hell out of people. That's not what his philosophy was about.
I don't know, it just sounds like he wanted more than just the surface of a person. He wanted to know more about them, not necessarily that he would judge what they do, but instead of just looking at face value, he wanted more.
Totally.
To
Yeah.
make his
Because for him, behind every single person was a lifetime of power dynamic. And they were a result of existing in this social milieu, right? Yeah.
I find this power dynamic interesting because I see a lot of power grabbing. So a lot of people that are trying to grab power from others. I mean, still have this in society as well. But it sounds like this power dynamic. It sounds like every individual has the capability of achieving power themselves.
Yeah.
So, because you were talking about he's more at the individualist and so level. So it's kind of interesting how he was referring to this is the dynamics across all society per individual instead of society overall having this overall view of power grab from other individuals.
And the power lies in the discourse itself. And so if Marxism becomes a predominant discourse, according to him, what does that mean about power in our society and how our discourses between individuals are going to change, etc. Yeah, that's why it's called discourse.